Chapter 20. Butcher. She has a cold but she's fine. Not that you asked because of course you don't care about your cream puff. I was lying on the couch staring at the ceiling and no I hadn't asked Armand, who had no business being in the black box which was filled with papers that kept piling higher and higher and higher. I couldn't seem to focus on them. I kept thinking of that last cream puff, the one that had saved Anthony, brought him back to himself when nothing else could have cured him. Now he was in the deep dungeon of Candlestick, so no one knew that he wasn't dead. 1. More proof that Violetta was the most brilliant baker the world had ever seen. One more reason for the monster in the darkness to destroy her. I sighed. If you're going to be here, then play for me. That should send him running. I was surprised to hear the sounds of his violin a few moments later. I closed my eyes and pretended that Violetta was the one testing the strings, tuning them, her hand drawing the bow across the strings, but Armand hadn't played for years and he was terrible. Not only was he terrible, he played some horrible rendition of a pop love song I'd heard on the radio. I didn't complain. For some reason listening to Armand play soothed some part of me that had been screaming ever since the night I'd found the dead baker. I closed my eyes and dreamed of Violetta, looking up at me beneath her dark lashes, soft lips parted, waiting for me, her smile and the last look on her face, shock and pain, but so much less than she'd feel later. I sighed heavily when Armand stopped and my own agony renewed in earnest. Play on. He ignored me, sitting next to me and taking a paper, glanced at it then tossed it back down. Violetta is staying at her uncle's house. She's realized that Landry is her father. That wasn't the best day for you to announce that you didn't love her anymore. I frowned at him. I never said that I didn't love her. She said that you didn't want her. I didn't say that. I said that I'd realized it wasn't going to work. He laughed. You think that you said that? What you actually said was that you don't really love her because her lines aren't good enough for you, and that if she really was as amazing as everyone said she was, you'd at least want her to be your baker. You also told her that she's not as pretty as Olivia, and not as interesting as all the other bakers. I made a dismissive sound. That's ridiculous. Oh sure, but she had no perspective on any of this. She doesn't know how rare it is for a butcher to feel desire, to feel weakness and fear, and what does to a man. She doesn't know how truly adorable she is. It's probably good that you dumped her so that she can go out with a normal civilian, find out how lovely she is. A normal civilian couldn't possibly understand how exquisite she is. He shrugged. No, probably not, but she doesn't need another butcher, not after you tore her heart out. I closed my eyes and shook my head, leaning back. All of my actions were for her safety and happiness. Whatever. I'm here to talk about the vampire. I opened one eye. What about her? I want her. What would you do with a vampire like Voltaire? He shrugged. The CM obviously isn't going to execute her, so he may as well release her. She could be useful. So tell the CM that. I did. He insisted that I talk to you. I think he wants me to irritate you so much that you get off the couch down here. You haven't gone hunting since that night. I shrug. You and Sebastian seem to have a handle on it. But we're not attuned like you. We wouldn't have found the baker. I sighed. Maybe I'm worried what else I'll find if I start looking. He nodded. To be perfectly honest, you're taking it rather well. I frowned at him. Thank you. What are you talking about? Your transition to CM. You know how most of them go crazy, run away from all butchers, ask the local pack leader to infect them, join a nudist colony. Actually, that one makes sense. I stared at him, sitting up slowly until I was close enough to throttle him with my bare hands. Somehow I resisted the impulse. You got infected after you had a vision. He hesitated, then nodded. Something like that. I didn't realize that the visions aren't real. Of course the visions aren't real. All the millions of ways I could destroy Violetta couldn't possibly all come true. You should have known that. The Sam explained it to us. He stared at me for a long time. Right, so because I allowed fear to control me, I must be much more idiotic than you, who are letting fear control you. It's not controlling me. I'm simply seeing the dangers and making certain that the worst ones don't happen. He laughed. You have no idea what the worst things are that could happen. Me choosing fear opened the door to things that I'd never imagined but were everything I was trying to prevent. You're acting in fear and hurting your sweet baker. It's stupid. I sighed. I don't expect you to understand me, Armand. I don't either, but acting out of fear is something I understand intimately. I know that my words aren't going to change your behavior. I just want to be able to say, I told you so, when you realize that the nightmare you thought you were preventing is only the tip of the iceberg. I closed my eyes, heart throbbing. That's the stupidest reason I've ever heard for becoming a werewolf. He laughed. The fear is extremely stupidifying. I won't argue with you there. Well, I guess I'll go see Violetta, see if she's still sick, let her take my energy and make me depressed biscuits, and then take her to the Greek for a haircut. Maybe he'll try to date her. That would be amusing. I shook my head. As bad as it would be for Violetta to be with a bogeyman, at least he would keep her safe, not bite her, and not drag her into the middle of a butcher war. Who knew war would have so much paperwork? Some senior butchers came in with more papers, and when I gestured them to put it down on the already teetering stacks, one of them shook his head. Sir, you need to eat. I stared at him. Don't I? You've been down here for 4 days. The younger butchers are worried. I considered that, then moved, grabbing him and pulling him into a headlock. While disarming the other one, I hissed into his ear. Are you my mother that you should be concerned about what I eat? Your duty is to fight the darkness, not show concern for me. Tonight I will lead you north and you will remember what you are and where your duty lies. I released them, stepping back and glowering at them. You may go. They turned and disappeared, leaving me in a room with a lot of other butchers, who were steadily ignoring my little outburst. It was one thing to have tantrums with the CM, but to show my own men my insecurities and weakness was unforgivable. I inhaled deeply before nodding at a butcher a year younger than myself. Bring me dinner and a basket of baked goods. He took off at a run while I settled down, determined to get through at least enough of this mess to know where in the world I was going to take the healthy group of butchers sure to shadow me. They didn't want me to faint in the middle of a battle again with no one but Sebastian to drag me to safety. They were worried about me. I had to shake off this lethargy and focus, but I kept seeing Violetta's face, hurt, and then the fear would encapsulate my heart. Ignored it. If I could ignore race who were nibbling on my joints, I could ignore the fear at least long enough to organize this mess. Hours later, I'd forced myself to eat Landry's goods, as nourishing as usual, and completely tasteless to me. I needed Violetta. I did not need Violetta, because I couldn't have her. I couldn't need what I couldn't have. I was doing fine without her. Not fine exactly, but I could blame that on the vision, the transition. Armand was right. I'd heard the stories of butchers who transitioned badly. Me spending a few days on the couch was hardly a sign of imminent madness and failure. I put on my coat and checked my knives, noticing that I hadn't cleaned one of them since the night I'd found the dead baker. The steel was corroded from the residual blood and gore. I sighed and put that down. I'd have to take it to the armory, maybe smelt it down. I'd do that later after I got back from this trip, which was bound to be disappointing. I didn't feel the darkness stirring. I didn't feel anything except fear. I walked out into the courtyard behind the garage, my body heavy and numb. Flexed my fingers and walked into the crowd of butchers gathered there, waiting for me. Where to tonight, butcher? Sebastian asked, like I came out to lead them. Every night. Everyone was breathlessly silent, waiting for me to say something profound. North. They nodded and began moving like that wasn't the most obvious statement known to man. We walked, spreading out a block long, 2 blocks, thinning out as we walked through the city from Calder to downtown, then north, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like north was too obvious. Something pulled me east towards the river. Not north at all. We walked and walked until I started to feel nervous. They were all following me and I had no idea where I was going. I'd never had this uncertainty as a butcher before. I'd always known where I was going and went there unerringly. One way or another I found what I was looking for, but this was different. This was me taking stacks and stacks of papers that I'd barely glanced at before tossing aside into random piles. At least they seemed random, but maybe my subconscious was working on them at some level. One could hope. I walked down narrow alleys lined with chain-link fences, garbage gusting around in the darkness. It was strangely devoid of monsters. Continued on for an hour, up and down the narrow streets, turning around and heading back. Seemingly randomly, I turned a corner of a large abandoned building that ended in a dead end. A figure was pressed against the brick wall, hair scraggly and eyes wild. Knew that face and my own heart constricted as I gestured my hand out for the butchers behind to fall into position. Soundlessly they spread out, ready to take out this butcher, but we would take him alive. From the looks of him, it wouldn't do much good. I pulled out my phone. Landry, is there anything of Violetta's left? He was quiet for a moment. Puffer sent over some terrible biscuits a few days ago. Never seen anything like that. Perfect. We'll be there in a few minutes. I closed the phone and moved towards the now crouching and snarling butcher. I'd never be able to forgive myself for sending him undercover if I couldn't bring him back. Violetta's strange biscuits had to be what I needed. She always gave me exactly what I needed and a little bit more. I held my hand up, holding the butcher's back. Sebastian edged too close before I gave him a sharp look and he fell away. Lee, I'm glad I found you. I was wondering if you could explain the last report you handed in. You mentioned something about a safe house that got overrun on 6th Street, but I don't recall having a safe house there. Why don't you explain that to me? Maybe show me where it is. He lunged towards me, snarling like an animal. I suppose that makes sense. Did you ever eat at that new Italian place? We could stop on the way. He hesitated at the mention of food. He'd always been a connoisseur of Italian restaurants. Some of the butchers were kind of snobbish about noodles. Tossed a Landry biscuit to him and he caught it, immediately stuffing it into his mouth. He was beyond hungry. Where had the baker been kept before he was killed? I needed to have more conversations with the renegade butchers in Calder's basement. How often were they fed? How much and what quality? So many questions I should have had before this moment. It's not as good as Riva's on the hill, but I've heard good things about their sandwiches. I threw him another roll and he caught it and ate it, tiny bit slower than before. How did you find me? He growled. Words. This was progress. I threw him another roll and he ate still. Suspicious and paranoid, but not completely out of his mind. I didn't. We're just out enjoying an evening stroll by the river. It's so quiet down here. Relaxing. I can see why you like it. He laughed, harsh and horrible. I like it? I'm trapped here. I've been trapped here for years. So the vampire was in his head, but in a new and special way. I'd have to bring the biscuits here. I held up my hand. 1 minute, Lee, I have to talk to Sebastian about his girlfriend. He's dating Olivia. Can you imagine the stress he's under? I walked over to Sebastian, gesturing him close. Orion, what about Olivia? You need to sweet talk her. Also, can you run down to Candlestick and bring back Violetta's biscuits? Be very fast. Good boy. I patted his shoulder and sent him running while I watched him for a long moment before turning back to Lee. I walked close, not too close, and threw him more bread. Have you tried fishing in the river? I asked companionably. The Sim wants to take me fishing next summer. I can't even imagine what that would be like. Butcher, you need to get out of here. His voice was low, urgent, and completely terrified. I waved his concern away. I haven't left Calder for days. It's good for me to get out and stretch my legs. Don't worry about it. I'm fine. He shook his head, eyes going wild again. You have to leave before he finds you. Don't worry about it, I said, steel in my voice that made him flinch. Relaxed and smiled at him before I continued persuasively. We'll talk about that later. Right now let's talk about fishing. Have you ever fished before? He shook his head, concern warring with frustration. Butcher, fishing doesn't matter. You need to understand the danger. But maybe I do understand the danger. I'm supposed to be the butcher. After all, maybe what I need to understand is fishing. Tell me what you know about fishing, Butcher. Don't leave anything out. I threw him another roll, and he ate it, staring at me in consternation before he began to tell me what he knew about the history of fishing. He was a good butcher, following orders without questioning things too much. If he talked about fishing, he wouldn't talk about whatever would trigger the same meltdown Anthony'd had. Now, Anthony was sane, but he didn't remember much about the last 6 months. If the monster had left the same trails of chaos in this butcher's mind, I could hope for a few minutes of rational information before he broke down. If I had Violetta's goods with me, I wouldn't have to go through this, but the risk of losing all information was worth the hope that he could be brought back into the light. I kept him talking about fishing for a long time. The butchers around me shifted. This had to be the strangest and most boring hunting expedition they'd ever been on, as he chatted about fly fishing versus bait fishing, and apparently he actually had experience in the sport. I thought about where I would put a baker if I were bent on destroying my kind but still had the needs of my kind and liked to eat werewolves. That part still made no sense. It took Sebastian over half an hour to come back with the biscuits. He tossed them to me and I ran forward, butchers around me pinning Lee down while I forced the strange biscuit in his mouth. He gagged, fought, and it was nice to have Sebastian take the brunt of his attack while I focused on keeping his mouth full. He had to eat. I wouldn't lose this butcher the way I'd lost that one girl to the vampires. His teeth were sharp, good for biting biscuits and butchers. My teeth in Violetta's skin. Only a moment the memory went through me, but it was enough to knock me back. I kept staggering back until I came up against the wall, the need for Violetta rushing through me, more powerful than 1,000 waves. I needed her, but I couldn't have her. I needed her. I had her biscuits in my hand. What if the biscuits didn't work because I'd shut her out? What if I lost this butcher because of my fear for her? I stared at Lee where he struggled beneath a pile of butchers and shook my head. One life wasn't supposed to be above the greater good, but Violetta's life was above that of any other butcher who trusted me. If a few butchers fell because she wasn't beside me, that was nothing as long as she was safe. That wasn't a healthy attitude for a butcher to have. I tucked the biscuits away without eating one. I went over to Lee and took his face in my hand, staring into his eyes. Lee, report your findings on your mission to infiltrate the renegades, discover the leader and spy out their position and intent. He blinked a few times, trying to focus, spitting out some crumbs, but hopefully there was enough biscuit in there to do the job, that of keeping him alive no matter what he said. Orion, you're in danger. Be specific. He's coming for you. He wants to rip out your heart. He hates you. I smiled. The feeling is mutual. What will he do? He frowned and shook his head. I don't know. He needs a baker. He wants the one who saved the werewolves. I knew Bubber the baker. I had to dump his body where he wouldn't be found. You weren't supposed to find it. He's angry. I nodded. I'm sure he is. How many bakers does he have? He shook his head. I don't know. 3 of them use me for energy. I don't know where he keeps them. They move around all the time, guarded by the ones who feed them, but the bakers, most of them think they're working for the right side. He gets in your head until you forget who you are and what your purpose is. I nodded and started to get nervous. He should be convulsing by now unless this was something different. I didn't want something different. I handed him another one of Violetta's biscuits. Eat this. You probably won't want to. He ate it, holding his eyes tightly closed while he forced it down. No, he didn't like it. That was probably a good sign. Unless it wasn't. I wanted to eat those biscuits, take the crumbs off his lips and devour them. Orion, you need to take the butchers away before he comes. He'll destroy all of you. Here. I glanced around at my butchers, at 23 of them, a very good number. If you counted me and brought it up to 24. Well, I can't say that. I dislike that. I've been having a lot of self-doubts recently. All of this standing around is really dull. That's when I heard it, felt it, the shift as darkness grew around us and then fell from the sky. Zombies, vampires and werewolves crashed through the windows of the building, rising around us, falling down like ripe rain. I cut my way to the exit with Lee, holding him under my arm to shield him from the once human debris. The butchers roared as they cleaved rotted flesh from desiccated limb. I cut through monsters as they fell, filling the narrow space. Impressively, whoever this monster was, he knew how to get the darkness to join their forces. It was ridiculous. I could barely move and more kept falling on top of us until we were literally swimming through bodies. It seemed likely that this butcher was a trap, but who laid a trap that they didn't spring for 45 minutes? Had the monster taken the time to gather up this army of undead and decomposing in the hope that we'd still be around by the time they were lined up and ready to crash through the windows? Interesting. It showed a love of the dramatic, the impression that this beautiful mess couldn't help but inspire. I should have been terrified, but apparently the fear didn't apply to me personally, but to Violetta. The monster was here. He wouldn't be hurting her. I handed Lee another biscuit and continued through the horde, determined to make it to the alley exit with him before he went under. He had been under a great deal of strain. A few biscuits might keep him alive and even bring back his sanity, but they wouldn't give him the real rest he needed. Also, I needed the descriptions of the bakers and information on where they'd met Lee. He had to have some clues in his brain that I could uncover. Howling echoed to me, a howl like nothing I'd ever heard before. The werewolf was outlined against the night sky at the top of a lower building beyond the end of the alley where we nobly struggled. Armand. For a moment I thought he'd come alone, but then other figures crowded around him and then he leapt down, vanishing from sight for a moment, but the sound he made when he met the crowd of undead was unmistakable. That was the sound of a butcher. He'd been wearing the coat, the one from Odin. Maybe that's what inspired Armand's fighting style, but I couldn't help but think it was more likely Violetta's baking. A good coat could only do so much. Violetta. I needed her. If Armand, werewolf, could give her energy and eat her biscuits, surely I could do the same if I were careful. I didn't have the power to send her away, not that she would be any safer somewhere other than Candlestick. She wasn't at Candlestick, but at the Vespedes. A good number of butchers were patrolling the area. I'd seen to that in spite of my ennui. Lee fought, but we were barely holding our own when Armand's troops rushed in, a hairy army that ripped apart the darkness like it was tissue paper. Those dogs moved as one, directed by Armand, who hadn't shifted as he fought, even though his eyes gleamed bright gold. A butcher's scream pierced the night, a war cry of course, and I found Sebastian beside me, a wild look in his pale green eyes as he swept his knife in a deadly arc, evisceration and decapitation in every stroke. We need to get you out. What I really need is an umbrella. I smiled slightly as I ducked and lunged, parrying and then striking out. I did not kill any slower than Tansetta, but he was certainly more flashy, large and quick, fierce and seemingly reckless, but with instincts as sharp as any butcher I'd seen. I walked towards the alley's entrance with the assurance that my butchers would join me. I was almost there when a figure fell from the sky, larger, darker, and with burning red eyes that I didn't dare look straight at. Vampire. Maybe. How had a butcher been changed into a vampire, and why would that make him eat werewolves? He was mesmerizing to watch, every move a blend of skill and grace that made me want to throw my own weapons down in defeat. I could never be as good. Closed my eyes and flowed into the darkness and shadows, the hunger tugging at me, but not as strong as the tug towards Violetta. The monster was here. If I could slaughter him now, he would never threaten Violetta again. I forgot about Lee, leaving him behind as I faced the monster, drawing knives. As I cut through the zombies, spinning, ducking to get closer to him, he fought towards me, cutting down Armand's soldiers and my butchers with every stroke. It was difficult to kill butchers. I couldn't worry about those that fell. This was my chance to destroy him once and for all. Finally I met him, his movements a blur, but always my knife was there to block, my body twisting out of the way at the right angle in the right moment. He seemed so much larger than he was, all muscle and height, but up close he wasn't so huge, certainly no taller than Tansetta. Had he fallen? Fought. The smell of the monster rank and cloying, sweet almost like fresh meat, and an underlying stench of rot. The little butcher's all grown up, the monster hissed, his voice striking me like a blow, a vampire's voice that could render the reason from a mortal man. Happily my reason had fled from me the moment I told Violetta that I didn't want to see her again. Thank you, I said after I decided it may as well be a compliment. I slashed a knife at him, then had to backpedal to keep from his own slash. Couldn't see his face, not that I tried that hard. I didn't want to meet those eyes. You're going to die here this night. I inhaled deeply, the sickening stench and the near river. It's a good night to die. And then your sweet baker will be unprotected. I stumbled back from his fierce swipe, stringy hair dangling in front of his face. He fought like a butcher, but more vicious, more quick, more everything. He probably could kill me. I didn't mind that, but Violetta, I could not leave her defenseless. I threw a ball of holy water at him, but he threw a fireball and they cancelled each other out nicely, except for the rush of steam that filled the air between us. I hadn't eaten Violetta's cooking in too long. I couldn't fight the forces of darkness that still fell from the sky, burying me beneath their weight along with this horrible monstrous creature whom I needed to send back to hell. I quieted my mind and let the movement come from inside, letting my body move in a flow as easy as drops of water rolling down a window. Every movement was An extension of my intention, my calm acceptance. Life would bring what it would. Fate, destiny, the will of God, I could not fight that, but I could fight my own fear, my own personal weakness. Suddenly it didn't seem that the night swam so thick with the darkness, and when Armand fell in beside me, lunging forward to snap at the monster's throat, I smiled. In only a few moments Sebastian was on my other side, the three of us untouchable, moving in perfect rhythm, led by me without the slightest doubt. The monster knew when the power shifted, when he understood that he would lose, and turned, disappearing into the darkness and leaving me with no particular target but lots of bodies. I lost myself to the hunger for a few moments, a few hours, some time that I forgot the aching in my heart, the fear. We'd come face to face with the monster who gobbled up werewolf villages, and we'd live to tell the tale, but he'd gotten away. Afterwards, in the middle of the mess, I frowned at the biscuit in my hand. I'd given them to fallen butchers to help them recover, but this last one I couldn't quite give away. I had other things to do than think about a biscuit. But I couldn't help imagining her hands in this dough, her face angry and hurt when she pounded on it. I put it in my mouth and for a moment forgot everything as I tasted Violetta. Her energy, her life, her sweetness, but then bitterness and sorrow filled me. With the depth of her suffering. She needed me, and I had abandoned her. I fell to my knees and another vision descended, of her lost and destroyed. Without me to protect her, to keep her safe. Chapter 21. Baker. I blew my nose, washed my hands and continued to follow Puffer's precise directions for popovers. Did you put the pans in the oven already? He asked, frowning over my shoulder as I mixed the dough to a creamy consistency. Yes, sir. They're been preheated. I think we're ready to pour. Mix it hard now, until it's frothy while I fetch the tins. They'll puff a bit more that way. I nodded and whipped the mixture with the ancient whisk until small bubbles rose to the surface after each stir. I scooped the mixture into the pan. Quick, precise, in time to Puffer's nodding head. These had a few extra ingredients than the usual from Puffer's smaller store of weird stuff. He explained what each of them did and how things worked together to create other things. Zebra hoof powder, for instance, worked to rebuild blood cells, but if you added ostrich eggshell to it, you'd have a blood thinner that also increased heart rate and lessened pain. At the same time, he reminded me often that my instincts were always right. Whatever I knew, I had to follow my heart, which would lead me right. My heart was with Orion, so I only nodded and repeated in my mind the powders and their various uses. A sharp rapping came on the door. I looked up to see Armand standing outside, looking a bit more irritable than usual. I looked at Puffer and he gave me a sharp nod before he headed to the door, letting Armand inside and him out at the same time. Puffer didn't like Armand too well. You look better, Vanilla. I paused in rolling out dough to blow my nose, then washed my hands and continued. Thanks. Landry sent over some cold medicine, some soup, but I left it in the car. You're going to refuse it again, right? I frowned at the pale dough, creamy like Orion's skin. I crumpled it up and threw it down on the marble tabletop, turning to Armand. I've been thinking. He cocked his head. Is that strange for you? Orion asked me to be his baker, and I agreed, but now he doesn't want to kiss me or see me at all. I understand that he had some kind of vision or whatever, but wouldn't he still want me to be his baker? If he's going to be rational, he should be rational and insist that while there can be no affection shared, he needs me as his baker if he's going to be as strong as he needs to be to find and destroy my parents' killer. He went to the oven, peering through the glass door and sniffing. He's transitioning. He's not going to be rational. But that's what he used as an excuse to break up with me, rational logic. Can't argue against that because I'm not completely insane yet, but seriously, there's no reason for me not to be Orion's baker. Not unless I'm running away from him and this world, which I'm not. I gave him a pointed look. If you open up that door before they're ready, I will scalp you. So there's no reason for him not to be my butcher, other than that he's worried I'll kiss him and put him in another coma. He's not worried about that, he said, sniffing along the counter. Why not? That's rational. I told you he's not rational. He's afraid that he's going to hurt you, not the other way around. Also, he's thinking about the future, long-range outcomes, and he sees the two of you having children like your idiot brother, who almost died, watching them suffer, watching you suffer for them, that kind of thing. Don't you have anything that I can eat? I went to the fridge and slid a meat pie I probably dripped snot into the night before across the counter to him. I wouldn't tell Armand. Actually, maybe I would. You can have this, but I think I sneezed on it a few times. Also, maybe my runny nose got into the sauce. He took the meat pie and sat down, cutting it with one of his big knives and eating a big slice with his hands. Armand, you need to wash your hands first. He nodded and got up, washing his hands for a long time very thoroughly, before he came back to the table. Thank you. I gasped. You said thank you. I'm going to have to tell you to wash your hands more often. He ignored me, gobbling up the meat pie instead. After he'd eaten the entire thing, he leaned his elbows on the counter and blinked sleepily at me. So how are you going to get Orion to let you suck the life out of him again? Rationality isn't going to work. He's talked himself into thinking that you're happier without him. He cocked his head. He might be right. It's not easy to be with a butcher, particularly one that's transitioning. He's worse than a curmudgeon. He's a wan, pathetic, whiny, lazy weakling, laying around all the time, barely eating, barely sleeping, simply rolling around in his misery like he can't get enough of it. I sniffed and placed the dough in the pie pan. Armand, can you turn the oven down for me? 200 should do it. Don't open the door or I will chop off your fingers. If Orion was really that miserable, then I had to help him. He would hurt me. He wouldn't be nice to me anymore, so I couldn't go in with my heart on a platter for him to crush. I had to put Violetta away and go back to being my brother. If I were a boy, I could walk into Calder, go down to his man cave and grab him before he knew I was there. I could play the violin for him. I could listen to him talk about whatever bothered him, and I wouldn't be part of his problem, his worry. I inhaled deeply. Armand, what kind of clothing do male bakers wear? I mean, interns like me. He scratched his chin. He should probably shave at some point. He was so scruffy. White shirts, black pants, black suspenders, black shoes. What do you have in mind? I smiled at him and he smiled back. I could use a haircut. The Greek will have a lot of fun with this. I think he's missed you being in drag. And Casper might flirt with me a little bit less. He scowled. Casper? That's a butcher waiting for a girl to stab him through the heart. If you're going to play baker's boy, you should probably have some knife skills. I nodded and glanced at the timer. After this comes out, you can help me with that. I can. I shrugged. You did say that you're slightly responsible for me, didn't you? He grinned at me. To tell the truth, I'm slightly fond of your muffins. You have a new cut on your face. The other one on your cheek is healed, but that cut, I said, brushing my finger across his forehead, looks new and like it might get infected. I'm going to put some stuff on it. We'll see if I can. Remember Puffer's instructions. I made a paste, put it on his head while he stared at me, still seeming sleepy. If you're too tired to teach me how to knife someone, you can come back later. The alarm went off and I went to take the popovers out of the oven, taking them out carefully and putting a slit into the bottom for the steam to escape, as Puffer had instructed. Give me one of those and I'll teach you and let you suck the life out of me. Ooh, you know how to really make a bargain. All right. I tossed him a hot one and he caught it in his mouth, snapping it out of the air. Impressive. Come on. We'll spar in the garage. It's mostly empty. Armand got up close and personal, knocking me back until I stood my ground and twisted around him, pulling my knife. He sighed and fixed my hand, not talking a lot, just moving me in the right place. He didn't usually touch me, so it was a little bit weird, but if I were going to transform into Cesario, my male persona, weird was only the beginning. The Greek was delighted to help turn me back into a boy. Armand left me at his haircutting salon. Your hair was really getting some length, but this cut will be easier to wash. And where? Are you going to be a woman every once in a while or stay this Cesario from now on? I shook my head. From now on, at least around butchers. He beamed at me, his eyes bright with tears. That's so romantic, being with him as a man if he can't have you as a woman. I stared at him. It's not supposed to be romantic. Supposed to be practical. But what if he tries to kiss you? I shook my head firmly. We're not going there again, at least not until after this whole transition thing and he chooses to be with me. What I need to be is a baker to help him get through this whole thing. That's what he needs, not more complications. He sighed but nodded. By the time he finished with me, my hair was kind of cool and not pretty. When Armand came in with the shopping bags, he grunted. And didn't even complain about having to shop. Why would he? It wasn't girls' clothes. I went into the cramped bathroom and back, ignoring the werewolves in the cage, the girl the same but the guy younger this time and kind of attractive if you like scruffy and toothy. I went in a girl with an edgy hairstyle and came out, bust-bound, clad in menswear. Armand had included a black baseball cap, so that went on top, and I looked like I was seriously ready to park cars. Yeah, I looked kind of like a valet in the white button-down and black pants. There were worse things to look like. He'd also gotten me a black backpack and a black coat. He'd really gone to town. The shoes were smaller than I was used to, since I'd stuffed Boss's old shoes with socks, but it was nice not to trip, and it was great to have full-size pockets and everything. I walked out as a boy, and the two werewolves stared at me like I was an alien. Okay, Baker, now you look natural, Armand said with a grin. Are you going to take my energy before you go back to Candlestick? I was a little bit nervous about seeing Landry again, but whatever. I grabbed the back of his neck and pulled his energy out of him. It would be faster with more contact. I reversed the cap and leaned my forehead against his neck, feeling his pulse race beneath the skin, smelling the wildness and warmth that was Armand, at least between the bursts of noxious energy that I dodged, at least metaphorically, psychically, something. I pulled away and nodded at him. Eat the popovers, I'm taking this with me to Candlestick. I'm going to need it. I headed out the back door, ignoring the shadows that moved around the edges of the yard. You think Landry's going to yell at you? I shrugged. I think that I'm going to yell at him. He chuckled. Really? That should be interesting. I didn't answer him as I walked towards the small hatchback. Vanilla, why don't we take the bike? I turned to Armand and saw him with a motorcycle, an enormous machine that was sleek metal and distressed leather. I walked around it, half impressed, half terrified. It wasn't safe. But I wasn't scared. Fluffy, delicate Violetta who Orion needed to protect. I was Cesario, tough Baker who could hold his own, or at least who would eventually. Sure. Armand climbed on the front and I hesitated before I straddled the thing, not touching Armand. How did guys ride on motorbikes together? When he took off, I grabbed him around the waist and held tight while he bumped over the yard, down the curb to the street. It was a little less wild on the pavement, but I still grabbed him a couple of times. It was freezing, but the coat was warm, and my old clothes in my backpack would pad me slightly if I fell off the back. At the same time, where were the helmets? If I fell, my head would crack like an egg. I grabbed onto Armand's waist and pressed my cheek to the back of his brown coat. He laughed and went faster, like I was encouraging him. I closed my eyes and clung to him until we got off the highway and Armand finally slowed down. I sat up and gripped the seat behind me, determined not to act like a silly little girl. I was tough. So tough. I grabbed Armand around the throat and pulled the energy out of him. He gripped my hand as we coasted up to the gate and he parked with a jerk. You want the driver to pass out? I couldn't take that much energy unless I kissed you. You shouldn't have gone so fast, and you shouldn't drive without a helmet, and you should never let me go without a helmet. Are you crazy? No need to answer that. I swung off the motorcycle, gave him a short wave and headed to the gate. The guy in the gatehouse opened it for me, apparently a lone person on foot. Dressed like a baker wasn't all that threatening. I headed up the long winding drive wondering why Armand had taken me this way, instead of through the back, past the pond of purity. By the time I reached the curve that revealed the front porch, I saw Landry standing in the open doorway, large arms folded over his chest, the CM behind him leaning against the doorway. This was it then. I squared my shoulders and kept my hands down, calm, steady. I nodded to Landry and the CM. Hello. I'm Orion's Baker. You can call me Cesario. I don't want to be pampered and I don't want any nonsense. I'm here to do a job, so let me know what you need and I'll try to do it. They were blocking the doorway or I would have gone past them running away. Probably. As it was, I had to stand there while Landry's eyes narrowed. The CM smiled and held out his hand. Cesario, is it? Welcome to Candlestick Manor. Stay as long as you like. I shook his hand and since I was there I took his energy as much as I could pull out of him in 5 seconds. Not a lot, but more than usual. I would do this weird or not. Landry rolled his eyes. Cesario? That's my middle name. I raised my eyebrows. Probably because you're my biological father. Now that We got that out of the way, we don't need to talk about it again. The CM laughed, low and only for a moment, but it earned a scowl from Landry. He is very clear. He doesn't want any fuss, doesn't want any nonsense, only here to do a job. That's very commendable, Cesario. Please, come in. He stepped back, allowing me room to get around Landry. I walked directly to the kitchen, needing nothing from the CM and nothing from Landry unless he felt like teaching me something useful. I went to the flour bin, almost filled a bowl, then made a well and cracked 3 eggs into it. What was I making? No idea, but I had to make something, so I didn't freak out about Landry staring at me. I worked kneading dough and slicing meat off a goat, making a mess of it until Landry came over and told me what to do, not touching me and not talking about anything else. Focused. Until it was dinner and butcher's boys came in to take trays up to the butcher's above. They were having a dinner apparently. I took a plate outside, wearing my new coat and sitting in the apple tree. While I ate, I saw Sebastian come out, heard him call me, but I waited until he was under me to call him. Look up, Ba. He looked up, grinning. You're back at Candlestick. That will take some pressure off the butchers, not have half of them patrolling the Vespetti's neighborhood. Why are you up in a tree? I climbed down, scrambling quickly, hesitating on a branch 8 feet off the ground before I did a double backflip dismount, landing perfectly. Show off. Fish face. Show me how to stab a butcher. I pulled out a knife I kept in my coat pocket and lunged at him. He had me disarmed in a matter of seconds, but he was laughing. I stomped his instep and brought my elbow back into his solar plexus, which made him laugh a little bit wheezier, but he was still laughing. Nice Vi.
Calme, Cesario.
He raised his eyebrows and then noticed what I had on, including my hat. Wait, you're dressing as a boy again? Hate to say it, Cesario. But everyone knows you're a girl. He handed me the knife and pulled out one of his own. I lunged at him, but he grabbed my wrist, twisting my knife back at me while his own knife came into my stomach. He'd somehow reversed it so the handle hit me instead of the blade, which left me gasping and clutching my stomach. It's not about being a boy, it's about being a baker. How many girl bakers are there? Hardly any. So I'm going to be a baker, sex not included. He snickered. If you say so. I'm not sure that Orion's going to buy it, though. I slammed my head into his stomach, knocking him back, knives forgotten. He laughed and rolled on top of me. He was too heavy. Not fair. I grabbed his face and sucked the life out of him, not fast enough, but someday I would knock him out, and then I'd be stuck under him. HM. I should think this through. Get off me, B. You're so heavy. Are your bones made of lead or what? Ugh. You eat too many magic muffins. He sank onto me even heavier. I bit him. He yelped and backed off, checking his arm where I bit him. I sat up, breathing hard, and grinned at him. What? Can't take a baker bite. He frowned at me and rubbed his arm. Are you going through some kind of hormonal imbalance or something? This isn't you dressing up like a boy. Fighting, what's going on? I stood, brushing off my pants. They brushed off really well. Nice. Not me is the point. I want you to take me to Calder. I'm going to see Orion. I have some baked goods to bring him. He frowned at me, still clutching his arm. Man, Caesar, I'm not sure he'll like that. I rolled my eyes. You're such a baby. I'm his baker. If he doesn't like it, he can tell me. No one needs to know that you're the one who brought me to Calder. He thought about it for a minute before he nodded. Okay. I wouldn't normally do this, you know. I'm not betraying him. I patted his head, but I had to reach up high to do it. Yeah, I know. You're in love with him. Let's go. I've got to get back early so I can go running. He scowled. Running? Why? That's not safe. I laughed. Because I'm out of shape. I have to be able to beat you up, little brother. I'd been born 23 minutes before him. He snorted but went with me to the garage and the little black car he seemed to have as part of his butcher's boy position. Nice ride, I said, adjusting the seat so it was reclined, and I splayed my legs out. He shook his head, glancing at me. Yeah, you know, I always thought you were a little strange, but this really proves it. How's Olivia? He was quiet for a minute. She's great. Like Orion, only a woman. He snorted. She's gotten a little bit weird lately, like when we're together. She'll want to hold hands and stare at me. It's kind of creepy. I sighed. I thought you liked her. I do. I mean, she's amazing, but she's kind of a lot. And when she's staring at me like that, I remember that I have a lot of other things to do. I studied him. How does she look at you? He shifted uneasily. I mean, I guess sort of like she loves me, which is crazy, but it's how it feels, and I'm not sure what to do. I can kiss her, but I don't know about the staring thing. I snickered. The look of love. So terrifying. You really are gutless. He frowned at me. It's not easy. I have all these duties more since the butcher found the dead baker, and I don't have time to figure out how she feels and how I feel and what this all means in the greater scheme of my existence. I just want to be a butcher and kill stuff. I try to tell her that, so she knows that I like her, but I'm not ready for the staring thing. But she's just like, I can be patient. This has to be so hard for you. And, yeah, but I don't think we're talking about the same things, and I don't know why she's not mad at me for not texting her enough or calling her or thinking about her all the time. I don't know. She expects so much usually. But now she doesn't. I'm worried. I sighed. Are you worried she'll take it to the next level or that she'll dump you? My chest tightened at the reminder of being dumped, but I shook my head and focused on the now, on my brother. I didn't have a heart, I was Cesario genderless baker. Genderless, loveless, with single-minded determination to bake the crap out of the world. That was me, and I liked it. I kind of don't know why she hasn't already. She's not desperate. There isn't a butcher who wouldn't fall all over himself to be with her, except the butcher, of course. Of course, I said blandly. He kept quiet for the rest of the ride, which meant that he was having second thoughts about this. The thing was, he knew perfectly well that if he didn't take me, I'd take a cab or walk, leaving me unprotected, and that wouldn't go over well. Still, he didn't feel good about it. I almost felt bad for making him worry about his precious Orion, but I got over it. He was my brother. He should beat Orion up for dumping me. I glared at him. You know that Orion dumped me the same day he told me he loved me. He glanced at me with wide eyes, pale green eyes like Landry. I looked out the window. Sorry, Cesario, but what do you expect me to do about it? He smiled at me. I'm Jonathan Daughtry. I don't believe I've ever truly thanked you for your service here on All Hallows Eve. It was nothing, I mumbled. Orion's life isn't nothing. Following your instincts out of pure faith isn't nothing. You are so far from nothing, Violetta. I can't begin to tell you. You've been baking with Landry for some time now. What do you think? I blinked at him. Why couldn't I relax? It wasn't anything he said or did, but I felt like he was watching me, or aware of me, or knew something I didn't. No, of course he did. He was head of all the butchers in the area. I think Landry is a very good baker. Not just a baker either. He's a fantastic cook, chef, whatever. He's really flexible and lets me do whatever I want, which is a little confusing because I'm not sure if I'm messing up, and I know I have a lot to learn, but he's great. And the baking, being a baker, do you think it's for you? I stared at him. His eyes were more golden than Orion's. After only a few weeks I was supposed to know the answer to that, but I did know. Yes, I want to be Orion's baker, and I want to be Landry's in turn. He smiled and pulled out a manila file folder. He handed it to me and I opened it to see a sheet of paper, an account, and a very tidy sum that would set me up with good tuna for life. Probably the good hot dogs too. This will be the starting amount from the butcher/baker fund, so you have the freedom of your choice of school, college, whatever you like. This, he said, pointing to a separate line below, is your weekly allowance during your internship. Is it adequate? I swallowed and nodded. It was much better than any full-time job I could get. Without a college degree, how long will my internship be? He shrugged and tapped his fingers on the desk. Baker's school is usually 4 or 8 years depending on the country. Your position is unique. You started late with official internship, but your mother trained you growing up. I don't think your internship will last longer than a year or two. What we can't teach is the depth of connection that you have with the butcher. Landry and I spent years together, but our connection isn't nearly that remarkable. It's interesting because you connect with so few people. Armand, the former butcher, you connect with him, isn't that right? I shrugged. Armand? Sort of. His energy is all over the place. Yes. His lack of stability is why he can't be a butcher. It's unfortunate. He was very good. I nodded. Right. He spends a lot of time here for someone who isn't a butcher. Yes, since the days of darkness we've needed his particular abilities to be our ambassador to the werewolves. They are flocking to our city daily, some for revenge but most for safety. The monster who is slaughtering werewolves. He nodded, so terribly serious. Some blame butchers. Why would they do that? They were killed the way that butchers kill things, only more viciously and violently than most of us could stomach. Oh. I nodded and felt sick. Do you think it is a butcher? He smiled mildly. No. It could be a former butcher, a renegade butcher, or a pretender, but no true butcher would put us all at risk in this way. Do you have any questions for me? I stared at him, fidgeting. Maybe why I can't connect very well. Do you? No. He cleared his throat. Landry and I have talked about that. I'm not certain. But I think it has to do with your skepticism. You weren't brought up to believe in energy exchange. You do believe in Orion not as the butcher but as himself. I can only imagine that you also trust Armand. I shrug. It isn't that I don't trust you, it's just that you seem so. He smiled slightly and closed the manila folder beneath his hands. His hands were Orion's hands, busy and accessible, and you probably feel that I could be a better father for Orion if I weren't the candlestick maker. I shook my head in denial before I shrugged hesitantly. It was true that's the impression that I got from all of our conversations, that Orion needed a father figure but didn't have one because the CM had to be his boss instead of his dad. It can't be easy for you, but he doesn't have anyone he can give his burden to. My dad was always there to give me a hug or tell me good job going to all my stuff. I don't know. I guess you guys go to butcher stuff together. He shook his head. Butcher stuff, yes. Maybe we could do other things. Baseball games or, he smiled slightly. I have no idea what Orion would like. He's always been so focused and driven to be the perfect butcher. You should take him camping. Not in the dark nights but during the summer. Maybe hiking and climbing, canoeing, that kind of thing. He studied me thoughtfully before he slowly nodded. Yes, I'll propose the idea to him. Perhaps you, your brother and Armand could come along. Armand. I stared at him. Oh, that sounds fun. Sure. He laughed, a wonderful warm sound that made me smile. Armand and Sebastian could watch each other suspiciously. Yes, I've never gone fishing before, but I've always wanted to. Landry is a good fisherman. He could come along with my wife. She's a remarkable woman. Landry's sister is her baker. They could both come. I stared at him while I tried to smile cheerfully. And my aunt and uncle. Vanetti. He nodded and started taking notes like this was seriously going to happen. Opened my mouth to suggest that he go camping with only Orion and not with dozens of other people, but he seemed so excited about it. Clearly the CM needed to go on vacation. Also, the CM had issues about being alone with his son. They needed to spend time alone together. I'd have to figure out something because the CM didn't know how to connect with him. Any other questions? He asked, looking up from his camping notes. He was kind of adorable and oblivious about some things. I think I'm good. Are you sure you're okay with me staying here? He looked surprised. Of course. As a baker, you're welcome in any CM's residence. It's a place of refuge for your kind. As Orion's good friend, you're certainly welcome to my home. Good friend? Okay, that was kind of embarrassing. Landry probably told him all about the tablets Orion took so he wouldn't bite me. Great. Thanks. Hesitated before I turned back to him. Did you know my dad? He nodded. Joseph Tancetta. He was a great butcher. Do you know why he quit? He smiled. He retired after serving for many years. He didn't quit, Violetta. He was still listed in our reserve. Oh, okay. What about my mother? Did you know her? He nodded, sobering. Lauren was an excellent baker. She assisted Landry in my wife's conception of Orion. I blinked at him. Oh, that's cool. Do bakers usually do that kind of thing? Indeed. Landry will have to teach you the proper baking techniques. The stronger the butcher, the more difficult it is to conceive. That's why children are so precious. Why you're saving those boys is so significant. I wanted to edge towards the door, but this was stuff I should know. Apparently the CM was not self-conscious about that. Well, he couldn't be if he had the whole gang helping out. I blinked rapidly, trying to shut out the images that inevitably arose from such conjectures. I opened my mouth to ask, What part of conception was particularly difficult, then closed it again. Just couldn't. I smiled brightly, happy to help. So all my account information is in here. I'll just go now. Thanks. He smiled and walked me to the door, putting his hand on my shoulder for a moment, holding me back. If you ever need to talk, if you need to share your burden, I am always available. He frowned thoughtfully. I suppose I'm not always available, but I'll certainly do my best. I laughed a little bit and nodded, then headed down the hall away from that exciting conversation, only slightly less humiliating than it could have been. The next morning, I focused on taking Mal's energy while Olivia sat beside me, fiddling with her phone, frowning at it fiercely. Such a Valkyrie or Amazon. Whatever. Mal twitched under my hands. Just take it already. I swallowed and frowned at him. The CM thinks I can't connect because I don't believe in energy. It's real, Olivia said, looking up from her phone, then threw it down on the table where it slid across the wood to stop beside a pan. I don't disagree, I said slowly. I just don't accept it and really believe. You know, I think that might be an explanation for what's going on here. But it really doesn't make any sense. But you can connect with Orion. She gave me a pointed look that made me wonder what she'd heard about us. I trust him, not his energy. She took my hands and put them on her cheeks, gazing at me while she leaned close, her voice breathy and her cleavage extremely voluble. Orion agreed to do a double date with your brother. Don't you think that's funny? I nodded and closed my eyes, focusing on the thread between us, the warmth of her hands, the softness of her cheeks, the pulse pounding beneath her skin. Faster and faster until a thread of energy spooled out of her and into me. She gasped and jerked back like she always did once I got started. It was almost as if she were afraid I wouldn't stop. Mal's turn, she said, retrieving her phone. She got up and walked to the pantry, speaking into her phone low. I rolled my eyes and put my hands on Mal's thin cheeks. His skin was smooth, his eyes steady and his energy solid, the little I could draw out of him. Does it hurt? I asked for something to say. If I were supposed to like or trust Mal, I'd have to do more talking with him. Of course not. It's pleasant, like warming my hands in front of a fire. I smiled. That sounded not bad. More energy flowed into me bit by bit while he relaxed on the bench. Where did you grow up, Mal? He nodded towards Olivia, and the way his eyes lingered on her before he quickly glanced down made me kind of ache for him. I grew up in Olivia's house. After my dad died, my mom remarried, not a butcher, so I was lucky they took me in. Where does she live? Florida. Maybe they moved again. I don't know. She had a few more kids that keep her busy, and she works a lot, so she can't really worry about me. I nodded. Harsh. At least when my parents were alive they'd wanted to see me. He sniffed and lifted his nose, looking at me like I was something disgusting. He'd scraped off his shoe. It's very ordinary in butcher circles for children to grow up in different houses. That's cool. Francis, for instance, his dad is a butcher without a house, so he's always staying with someone or other. He has no real home. I nodded. That makes sense. He pulled away from me and stood. I'm staying at Calder from now on. You'll have to practice taking energy from other butchers. That's great news. So you're doing better. Orion will be glad to have you. I sort of wished I could go back to Calder. I nudged him with my elbow, which made him look shocked and offended. I can't believe you're leaving me at Olivia's mercy, not that she has any. You're too cruel, Mal. He looked at me disdainfully. If you can't appreciate Olivia, then it's you who lack, not her. If you like her so much, you should date her. He stiffened like I'd poked him with a pin. Nonsense. She's seeing your brother, and if she weren't, she certainly isn't interested in me. All the same, he cast a furtive glance in her direction. You should write her letters to tell her how you feel. She can't be interested if she doesn't know how you feel. He made a face like he'd bit into a sour lemon and took 2 steps away from me. Your opinion is of little use to me. I cocked my head while I stared at him. I don't know, she fell in love with me after all. He looked scandalized, which I enjoyed while I turned and rifled through the cabinet for some inspiration. Landry came in. We're going to the market today. That way you can get your own peaches instead of stealing mine. Oh, were you going to use them for something? He smiled at me beatifically. Of course I was. I wouldn't have them otherwise. Neither the CM nor Orion complained, however. Come on then. Chapter 14. Butcher. I was almost caught up on my reports when an older butcher dropped a stack of folders on the table in front of the couch. I exhaled slowly so I didn't stab him. What is this? CM sent it over. Stuff about the seals, he said. Thanks, Alfie. So helpful. I stood up and stretched before opening the first folder. Some of them were heavy, the kind of thing they kept old and delicate documents inside. I spent the night poring over those folders, only shutting my eyes for 2 hours and 15 minutes as Violetta had demanded so ruthlessly. Violetta shoved the folders aside and rushed out of the black box, upstairs and almost into malmorning. Everything going well? Good. We'll talk later. I broke into a run, throwing on my coat as I went. I desperately needed to see Violetta and taste her lips. She'd liked the cooking meat on sticks thing. So medieval. We were now officially together dating, and it felt like an enormous step in an impossible direction. I pulled up at Candlestick, but before I could go in the door, my father stepped out and put a hand on my chest, blocking my entrance. CM, what can I do for you? I asked, glancing around him like she might be somewhere hovering in the halls waiting for me to come to my office. I almost sighed and shuffled my feet, but I wasn't a child. When I was a child, I hadn't wanted to do that. Apparently it was catching up to me. Once we'd arrived in his office, I tried to beat him to the point. The seal can't be fixed. It has to be entirely resealed after the other 2 seals are removed. He raised an eyebrow and poured himself a glass of water, then mixed a powder into it. Landry's orders, of course. What did he need special powders for? Perhaps his health wasn't perfect. What is the powder for? He glanced at me, surprised. Had I ever asked him a question about himself that didn't involve Butcher's business? Probably not. I have no idea. I think that Landry likes to try things out on me randomly. This one is vile. Would you like some? I held up my hand and shook my head. Thanks, no. Ah, he already has you taking nasty substances to keep you healthy for your Violetta. I cleared my throat. He does. So the seals must be recast. They lost many butchers getting those seals on in the first place. He nodded soberly. We can do better than that. We can. He studied me. Of course. We have more advantages than ever before. Technology. He smiled slowly. Perhaps that, but mostly I was referring to your brother. Your butcher's boy and your baker. It's a remarkable little group, don't you agree? I frowned sternly. Violetta is not part of my fighting team. Of course she is, Orion. She's the key to the entire thing. You must have noticed by now that she's attuned to you, Armand, and Sebastian, and none else. That allows strength of connection that cannot be achieved with further dilution. Perhaps she should stop trying to connect with others. I cleared my throat. What about her defense? He shrugged. I don't believe you'd allow her to practice on our guest. No, I wouldn't. He smiled. Not that it's your place to allow or not allow your baker. Yet, you are her protector as you are the city's. What do you think about camping? I stared at him. In North City? I doubt I'd get much sleep. He laughed. But there was something tight, nervous maybe. Violetta suggested that we all go camping this summer, fishing, hiking, that sort of thing. I've always wanted to visit the Yukons. Violetta wants us to all go camping? I smiled at the thought of her sitting beside me in front of a fire, leaning against me for warmth. Yes, your mother, Landry, Sebastian, Armand, and her aunt and uncle. I took a step back. Mother? Absolutely not. He sighed. You intend to bring her into this family, isn't that correct? Of course, but Mother will not be pleased. That was an understatement. But she has to come to accept Violetta, otherwise Violetta will feel like an outsider like her mother did. We cannot make the same mistakes. It's fine to insist that Mother accept Violetta, a completely different thing. To make Violetta the target of her wrath when she fails to. He frowned at me and I frowned back until I forced myself to look apologetic. Instead, it's bad enough when Landry and Mother rub elbows. Let's see how this Christmas goes and then plan camping. He didn't agree with me, but he did go back to talking about the seals instead. Also, he had a new assignment. I need you to travel with that gray wolf, what's his name, east and west to talk with werewolves about the threat and make certain they know it wasn't under Butcher orders. Leave the city? I can't leave. I have school. And Violetta. I need to get ready for Midwinter's Eve when the next seal is, and find a forger for the seals. Mostly stay with Violetta. He raised an eyebrow. You're the butcher. Who else shall I send? I glared at him, forgetting that I was trying to be appropriately respectful. I don't care. Send Merlot or Casper. Send nobody. The threat is here in this city. Leaving now would be worse than careless. It would be completely idiotic. Werewolves aren't going to listen to me, not when they think that I'm what slaughtered entire villages. He raised an eyebrow. Your job is to make them listen. It isn't only werewolves I'd like you to see, but vampires as well. I would like you to take Voltaire with you. I ground my teeth. You want to send me into the sticks with a werewolf and a vampire to make them all listen to how innocent the first am? I would happily slaughter them all. I am not their protector but their butcher. If you can't see that, then you're completely delusional, old man. I'm not an ambassador, but a dagger. It's what you created, and now you expect me to be what? He stared at me calmly while I yelled at him. If you're finished being emotional, I have a list of the communities I'd like you to visit. I took the paper, crinkling from the pressure I put on it. What am I supposed to say? Invite them to the city for safety, and ask them to be cautious and prepare for attack if they choose to stay. That's all. I laughed and ran a hand through my hair. That's all. Great. This will take me a week. Probably. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe normally before I glared at him again. Why? Would you like me to explain the bigger picture? If you don't make alliances and smooth things over, we will be at war. That's what this monster wants, and he'll get it if we aren't very lucky and very diligent. Make alliances? Smooth things over? Since when do I do that? He laughed and shook his head. Since the last village. The one where everyone was already dead. The one where you found a survivor. He'll go with you. 2 werewolves, a vampire, anything else? A bogeyman, a couple wraiths maybe. Some zombies. He frowned at me. Don't tempt me. Orion, this is a serious matter and you will do it as well as possible. If I don't find that you're inspiring trust in our allies, I'll send Violetta along with you. I stared at him while my stomach turned into a solid rock. What? You'll protect her, and therefore make certain alliances are made and nurtured. My heart pounded and my chest felt tight from the effort not to hurl myself on my father and beat him senseless. That won't be necessary. No? It might be good for her. She didn't like being left behind the last time you went. If I go anywhere with Violetta, I wouldn't ever come back. He raised his eyebrows and we stood there. A serious standoff before someone knocked on the door. Enter, my dad ordered, his voice hard and unyielding like it usually was. After talking to me, I half turned and studied the paper, trying to focus on those towns, organize them in my head so I could cover them in the least amount of time. It was one of my father's older butchers, murmuring about a vampire outbreak in a small city to the west. Exactly what we needed. Orion, the CM said once the older butcher had left. You'll need to take a butcher to stand guard while you're resting. Not Sebastian. I nodded impassively. Olivia. He raised an eyebrow. Really? I suppose that makes sense. Very well. I'll inform her. If you like. May I be excused to go see my baker? She might want to prepare something for my trip. He hesitated, mouth tight. Of course. I'll give you 6 hours to prepare. I will prepare my requirements while Violetta bakes. He raised his eyebrows. Requirements. Travel arrangements. I don't wish to waste time. He nodded. My resources are at your disposal. I smiled. Perhaps I should know what your resources are. My father smiled back. Perhaps you should. Violetta was not happy. First she kissed me until I was dizzy with wanting and regular dizziness. Then she set to work pounding on dough, beating the poor stuff into shape while I organized transportation. Helicopters would not work for travel with a werewolf and a vampire. That was a pity. We could take a limo between small towns, and a train from the east sector through the city to the west. The butchers had a private car decades old with a nice secure dark compartment for that kind of guest. How long will you be gone, butcher? Violetta pounded particularly hard, jabbing the heel of her hand into the dough. Too long. A week probably. And are you allowed to call me? With a vampire and a werewolf watching? Of course. Olivia could watch the Monsters while I took a very short break. I'm sorry. She looked up with a tight smile. Why would you be sorry? I cupped her face in my hands and gazed into her beautiful eyes. I'm sorry that I won't see you. I'm sorry that I won't taste you. I'm so sorry. The word sorry seems next to meaningless. I'm sorry that you're upset. She sighed and slumped against me, forgetting about her dough. I held her, heart fluttering against mine, fast like butterfly wings, so delicate and perfect. I don't mean to be upset. I'm just surprised and worried. You said you're going to warn werewolf villages? Will you be safe? Of course you will. You can fight 60 vampires, no problem. I kissed her forehead, brushed her soft eyelashes with my lips, then kissed her cheeks, her nose, finally her mouth. She tasted like honey, so sweet and rich. I held her and kissed her until I sank down on the bench helplessly. She raised an eyebrow and searched in my coat for the nasty concoction. When she poured it, I noticed that her hands were a little shaky. How am I going to live without you for a week? I'm so good at sucking the life out of you. And who will eat my burned biscuits? I suppose there's always Armand. I winced at the thought of Armand touching her taking his energy. If they had a connection, he might turn her if he wasn't careful, maybe even if he was. What about your brother? She stared at me, pale green eyes soft and vulnerable. I don't want to hurt him. I pulled her close for a moment, before I stepped away and pulled out my papers. Don't kiss him and he'll be fine. I tried to focus, but finally I pushed them away and simply watched her movements, strong, graceful, flowing from one task to another as she hummed under her breath, maybe Motown. I drank in the sight of her as though she were water and I was heading to a long desert. Landry had disappeared once I came in with the news, either to get away from her or from me, maybe to talk to the CM about it. What could I say to convince werewolves that butchers were above slaughtering them? We weren't. The only reason we didn't was that we had allied with them against darkness as long as they followed the mandate against harming innocents. I growled and Violetta looked up at me from the roll she was forming. You growled. Are you a werewolf? I walked over and put my hand on her waist, bending to gently nip the side of her neck. That must be it. She turned in my arms to stare at me, her eyes enormous and very serious. Orion, are you going to be in very great danger? If I couldn't handle it, the CM wouldn't send me. She frowned. He never makes mistakes? That was an excellent question. Was the CM making a mistake allowing me to be with her? Don't tell him that I said this, but the CM is trustworthy. He won't send me out if it's unlikely that I'll come back. Unlikely, but that's not good enough. You have to be perfectly safe. I laughed. Oh, Violetta, I would be in dire danger of death by boredom if I were perfectly safe. Don't worry about me. It's going to be a dull errand. Have to talk to people, warn them of the danger, and offer the city as refuge. Armand's going to love that. She stared at me, eyes bright, lips trembling. So you won't be fighting? I sighed. Probably not at all. I don't know how I'll survive. She buried her face in my chest. Thank you. I felt warm from the inside as I put my arms around her, holding her carefully, so I didn't squeeze her against me too tight. I almost said, I love you, but bit it back before the words were out. I felt it though. Love roared inside of me for this sweet creature who was getting flour and bits of dough all over my coat. I would happily die for her, kill for her, but this was something else. I had to be trustworthy, relatable, charismatic. I had to connect with monsters. For her, I would not only deal with the devil but do